Has there ever been a time in the history of all of us sitting here, unless you're over 80 and have been through the Second World War, when there's been so much trouble in our world as in the last couple of months? Something's happened in our world in the last couple of months that's highly, highly significant. Even we could say the whole year. So as we open the Word, may God give us insight, give us discernment to encourage us and strengthen our faith. The other week, we look after the kids out the back, and I got them all to draw a tree. And not one of them drew the most essential part of the tree. What was that? The roots. We tend to focus on only those things that our eyes or senses see. So if we can't see the roots, they don't exist. But boy, for a tree, the roots are everything. Every orchardist knows that if the fruit's no good, where do you focus the attention? On the roots, not on the fruit. The roots are very, very, very important. So may God give us discernment to dig our faith roots deep into who He is and to how He can take care of us. God, may You bless us as we open Your Word. May Your Spirit illuminate our mind, that it grows our faith and our sense of encouragement that You do care for us. May You teach us Your ways and lead us in a plain path this morning. Thank You for Your people, dear God. Amen. All right, let's get the Bible open, because it's not what I say, it's what God says. It's most important. Let's look at Chronicles chapter 12. And we will look at verse 32. It's going through all the tribes of Israel and their contribution to the cause of David. And this is what it says in verse 32. The men of Issachar. Who were Issachars? Issacharites. Well, who was Issachar for a start? He was Jacob and Leah's son. In fact, he was Leah's fifth son. He's one of the tribes of Israel. And it says about this tribe, the men of Issachar understood the times and they knew what Israel should do. And they're spoken here in a complimentary affirmation way. They were virtuous because they realised what was happening in the world. They knew what was happening and why it was happening, but they also knew what God's people should do, how they should act. So that's what we're going to have a look at today. What are our times and what should we do as a church in times like this? Many years ago now, I was with two pastors and we were in San Francisco doing a tour of mega churches. We thought we'd go around and have a look at what successful churches, and success was determined by the number of people they had on their roll. How could have we been so stupid back in those days? You know, if we were using that criteria for Jesus, He was absolutely a dismal failure, wasn't He? It's not the broad way, it's the narrow way, He said. So we were going there. Anyway, we arrived in San Francisco late one afternoon, and after we'd finished dinner, we decided we'd go for a bit of a walk, stretch our legs, get over jet lag. So our hotel was in Union Square, where the trolley car begins or ends. So we just went about one block off Union Square, and there are a lot of black Americans around there. Very quickly, we'd gone from this tourist belt to black Americans. And with all the bright shining lights and all the activity and all the noise and all the coming and going, we were just standing on a street corner, just trying to take it all in, when two policemen came out of nowhere. And they went up to a black American guy. He was tall but skinny. He would have been about 22, 23. And they gave him an almighty shove. And they shoved him so hard, and I was so close, that he hit the back of my calf muscle that was sore for a couple of days. Just gave him an almighty push. And then they had two torches because it was night and they had really long handles. And they started bashing him on the head, and I will never forget the sound of a torch bashing on someone's head. I'd never seen it before. I'd never witnessed such things before. And here, right standing there, I'm hearing crash, clunk. And the two policemen kept saying, "You're drunk, you're drunk." Now, he was a bit tipsy. And as he was being hit, he had his hands in the air. But I thought, I lived in Australia at this time, and I thought, man, if this guy's drunk, half of Australia could be arrested. He wasn't really obnoxious at all. And then a police car came, and they bashed his head on top of the police car to handcuff him, and then just bundled him into the car, and it was all over in the clover. I said to my mates, "We got to get out of here, there'll be a riot for sure." So we ran as quickly as we could to the other side of the street, and while we're there trying to take it all in, said, "Man, did that really happen?" Some black Americans were walking by, and we told them. And they said, "Oh, he must have deserved it." I don't know, who cares? They had no spirit, they had no sense of empathy. They had no sense of what was going on here. And so when many years later Rodney King, remember Rodney King? Where they beat him up and it cost billions of dollars for Los Angeles. They burnt down the inner city. It made a lot of sense to me why that had happened. But I tell you, earlier this month it didn't make sense. It didn't make sense to me that policemen were out trying to protect people at a peaceful march where Black Lives Matter, and 7 of them deliberately got shot dead. That didn't make sense to me. Didn't make sense to me on the 17th of July when in Baton Rouge 3 other policemen were shot dead, deliberately, intentionally. Didn't make sense. And what's happened in the past 7 weeks? Well, let me give you a roll call. Orlando, 50 people, innocents, killed. Istanbul airport, lining up, one of the busiest airports in the world. Innocent family, business people, travellers, lining up with no sense of wrongdoing, killed. 44 of them. In Afghanistan, 30 new police cadets. They'd just gone through a couple of months' training, and they were just coming out when a bomb exploded and killed 30 of them. Bangladesh, 24 innocents killed. Baghdad, 1 truck bomb. One guy driving a truck. How many dead? 325, mainly families, out enjoying late night shopping in a bazaar. Nigeria, in one day, Boko Haram, the militant terrorists, killed 81 innocent people. In Nice, just the other week, 84 innocent families out celebrating French National Day, not coming home again. Doesn't make sense. In Turkey, there's a coup and over 200 innocent people, not soldiers, innocent people killed, not coming home again. Tokyo, a mad, deranged person kills 19 handicapped people with a knife. What's going on in our world? Well, I'll tell you what's going on. Matthew 24. Let's get over there. Jesus told us these bizarre, lunatic things would happen. And I want to say this while I'm on, please. Every day we should thank God for the New Zealand police. They are exemplary. Now, there might be 1 or 2 crooks amongst them, but I tell you there's probably far more crook pastors in churches than there are crook policemen in the police force. Every profession has its sense of crooks, but our New Zealand police force are unbelievable. Remember when my boys were young and we were going up Queen Street, invariably a police car would stop and would engage with my 2 little boys. Or if they were on the beat, they would stop, they would get down, they'd talk, they'd interact. They're probably trained to do it, but it was absolutely wonderful how they'd do it. If you're in trouble, you go to the police. I remember being in Moscow once, just after the Soviet Union had broken up. And we couldn't find our way with the person we were staying with. So we said, well, look, there's policemen. Let's go and ask the policemen. They said, no way. Don't go anywhere near the police. I said, yeah, they'll help you. They'll show. No. But you know, we did. And I was astounded how they didn't know any English, but boy, they could understand a map, and how those men went out of their way to try and help you find your destination. Our police are exemplary. We ought to have a national thank our police day. All right, over here in Matthew 24, where Jesus is talking about the signs of the end, he says here in verse 12, and because of wickedness, or another word is lawlessness, because it abounds so much, the love of many will grow cold. Because of lawlessness, a lack of law. I want to give you two examples that have just happened recently to illustrate this in another way apart from the violence that's ripping our world apart. And let me tell you this, how many of you would like to go holidaying in France currently? I'd think twice about taking my family to France. That's how our world's changed so dramatically in the last few months. Okay, two examples of lawlessness, and you're going to say, hey, what's going on here? But let me hold judgment. Brexit. A couple of weeks ago, Britain voted to leave the EU. William preached a brilliant sermon on it, showing it was the fulfilment of prophecy. They shall not cleave one to the other. The feet of iron and clay of Nebuchadnezzar's image of Daniel 2. Daniel 2:43 says they shall not cleave. And here's England getting out of this union. Very significant. But there's an even equally significant thing in the Brexit vote. Most of the politicians, most of the business people, most of the bankers, most of the academics, what did they say? They said, we must stay with Europe or else there will be a catastrophe. Osborne, is it? Osborne, the Chancellor, who's like the Treasurer of the government, he said the British economy will go back 15+%. And you know what? 52% of the people still voted to leave, even when the experts had told them this is the worst, dumbest, stupidest, ignorant thing you could ever do. The majority still chose to leave. The elites, the leaders of the country, people either didn't believe them or believed them and said, we're willing to take the risk, but we're not believing you. This is a society of elites being absolutely their advice rejected. Let me give you another illustration that's happened this year that's absolutely shocked the world. Donald Trump. Honestly, if Satan was the Republican presidential candidate, they wouldn't describe him worse than they're describing Donald Trump. I wrote down some things here. They say about Trump, he's narcissistic, egotistical, he's a bully, he's a woman hater, he's got a warped personality, he's got a warped temperament, he's bad news from start to finish. Well then, how come he won 39 states? And do you realise with Trump, he resoundingly collected more delegate votes than anyone ever before in the history of the Republican Party, including Ronald Reagan. What is going on here? Well, what we've discovered about Donald Trump is not a politician. Donald Trump is a businessman. Donald Trump is anti-Washington. He's anti the elites. He's anti-big business. He's anti-Wall Street. He's anti all the people who are in. And he's there, he says, for the common man. Where Americans are going to take back our country again, and we're going to govern for the average Joe Blow America. And you know what? Where the journalists, the newspaper magnates, and the politicians ridicule him, somehow, in spite of all this man's obvious weaknesses, Americans are embracing him. That is a major shift. If you listen to how Trump insults people, he's insulted nearly every leader of his own political group. He's called George Bush the worst things on the planet. All of them are losers. That's never happened before. He calls newspaper losers. Some newspapers, like the Washington Post and the Guardian, he refuses to have them at his press conferences. And yet he still is rolling on. Something is happening in America. What is it? Well, I'm going to explain it to you. I believe it's lawlessness. Let me show you how it relates to a biblical account. Many businesses and politicians today have not valued people or acted to keep people safe and protected. In fact, they've often acted the very opposite. I was at a conference a couple of months ago in Denver, Colorado, where a Marine general, the guy in charge of the Marines in America, came to speak, and he said this to those in attendance. He said, in the Marines, leaders always eat last. Interesting little phrase, isn't it? In the Marines, leaders always eat last. He said, if you go to a Marine kitchen, it's always the junior Marines who are always at the front of the line, and according to your rank, how senior you are or how important you are, you get to the back of the line until the 5-star generals are always the last to eat. He said, we've always done it as Marines, and the reason why we do it as Marines is it's highly symbolic. It's symbolic that we're here to take care of our people, and that the needs of the people we serve and that we lead always come before our own needs. And that when it comes to battle, it's the same as in the kitchen. We will be there as generals and captains and whoever else we are with stripes on our shirt to protect our people. And when our people are lost and when our people get wounded and when our people are in the heat of battle, they know that we'll come and get them, because what we do in the kitchen is symbolic of how we treat our people. We value our people. Leaders always eat last. I thought, whoa. You know, it used to be like that in business. In business, right up until the mid-80s, you worked for a company and you were like family. They loved you like family. It was like lifetime employment for a company because you were like family. They loved you. They were there to serve you. They were there to look after you. They were there to help your family when they were in trouble. But then something happened in the 80s and 90s where that all changed. In the 80s and 90s, massive financial resources became pouring into economies and societies, particularly in the West. And organisations now became abundant in resources. And this is what happens, and we should know this from Revelation chapter 3 with the Laodicean church. When an organisation becomes rich in money and in goods, they suddenly cease to use their resources for the good of the people, but they bring them in to protect them. They safeguard their resources. They put a little hedge around it, and no longer do they share it like they used to. Sociologists have called it destructive abundance. Destructive abundance. And so what happened was people began putting money before people. Companies began putting profit before people. And so when the numbers started slipping, what did they do? Layoffs. Lay off people, lay off thousands of people, lay off 5,000 people just to make the numbers look good. That had never happened before the 80s. With all this money, there was a new breed of corporate leader who actually was obsessed with the profit, not with the people. That became a whole new thing. Goldman Sachs You might have heard it, very big American bank. And they were such an honoured, respected, esteemed bank up until the late 1980s when a new CEO came and he changed the whole culture of Goldman Sachs from one of serving the community and being a bank of character to where numbers counted, and people who took big risks got big rewards, and those who didn't take risks were fired. They were sacked, they were laid off. Well, it made some people spectacularly rich in this company, particularly the head ones. In fact, the CEO was so aloof from even his own people, let alone the bank branches. In his head office in Manhattan, he had his own elevator where he never ate or mixed with anyone else on any other floor apart from the executives. He was so aloof. He was so focused on his numbers. And the people took such risks that when it all turned to custard in 2008, with all the mortgage scandal, they'd loaned too much money and not enough security, and it all went topsy-turvy. The whole bank was going to go under. And so the government taxpayers gave Goldman Sachs $10 billion to keep them afloat. And within 1 month of being bailed out, you know what they'd done with that $10 million? They'd paid exorbitant bonuses to those who had got them in the mess in the first place. Is it any wonder Americans are going after someone like Donald Trump with all his checkered past and all his narcissistic ways? Because at least he's saying, I'm going to bring your jobs back, I'm going to stop Wall Street, I'm going to do this. And the people's primeval motivation is, we need leaders who will keep us safe and protected. In the animal world, they have alphas like wolves. I tell you, you don't become an alpha wolf in a pack by living the good life and not protecting your tribe. If you're an alpha wolf and an enemy comes over the top and you're sleeping, you're not going to be an alpha for very much long. But in America and in our Western culture, business leaders can be alphas and not even respect their people or take care of them. And that's what's gone wrong with the world. The world has become selfish. It's become protecting its own and not protecting others. We've become a very individualistic society instead of a society that works together. Well, that's what's wrong with the world. But I need to say this. Let's bring it back to my text. What's that got to do with lawlessness? What's the greatest commandment? Matthew 22. What's the greatest commandment? Pharisees asked Jesus, what's the greatest commandment? And Jesus said, you shall love the Lord thy God with all your heart, with all your mind, with all your strength, and you shall love your neighbour as yourself. It is a command to love. And what you're seeing happening in corporate America, in corporate New Zealand, in corporate Australia, in corporate England, in corporate Western societies is lawlessness, how they're treating people. When prophets go before people, it is lawlessness according to God's word. Is it any wonder that people are responding to absolute mavericks and way outsiders and what we'd call outliners today? Because we have not honoured God's law of making people number one. So what do we do about it as a church? See what the problem is? Problem is, the world is not taking care of people and they're not valuing people. Well, the church then has to take care of each other. If the world doesn't believe its leaders have got your best interest at heart, like they obviously did with the Brexit in England, then the church members of Royal Oak better believe that we exist to take care of you. It's an absolute imperative. It's a non-negotiable. It's absolutely set in concrete and stone. It's not optional. This church doesn't exist primarily for evangelism and ADRA and community services and all these other beautiful things that we do. It exists primarily to reveal Jesus and taking care of each other first. And if we don't, we'll end up like corporate America and corporate New Zealand, where lawlessness, one day people will rise up and say, we've had enough of leaders like that. We want to be kept safe. We want to be known. We want to be valued. We want to be taken care of. We want to be loved, because that fulfills the law. So what can we do? Well, Revelation 12:17. Go there. Here is a description of the last church. Revelation 12 is about the last church. Here are they who keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus. What do we always think when we read, here are those who have the commandments of God? You know what I always think? Oh, okay, here's a church that has the 10 Commandments. And it's partly right. But after what I've shared today, you ought to have a bigger picture of what it means. What also does it mean? Here is a church that loves God supremely. Here is a church that loves people supremely. Here is a church all about people, not about things and personal things. Here is a church that just is centered in people. People first, people second. People's needs are important to this church, as expressed through the 10 Commandments. What good is the Sabbath if we hate people? Think about it. The Jews killed Jesus to keep the Sabbath. What good was that? Lunacy, stupidity. We must be lovers. The law is only fulfilled in a lover's heart. The Sabbath is only rest when we love each other. We must love as a church. And how do I know that? Well, let's get Jesus as authority. John 13. Oh, I like this verse. Well, there's 2 verses here. John 13 and verse 34. A new, what's the key word? New, a new commandment. This ain't really a new commandment, because in Leviticus 19, God had already shared this. But a new commandment with a new motivation I give you. Love one another as I have loved you. The cross is central here. Oh yes, Moses talked about loving one another. Love your neighbour as yourself. You know, the greatest commandment is a quote of Leviticus 19. Love existed in the old covenant. But here Jesus said, a new motivation I'm giving you. Like I have loved you. How is he about to love them? Dying on the cross for them. What indescribable love that God, enthroned in perfection, would choose to come down and be one of his people so that he might take the penalty that we deserve and we might have the blessing that he deserved. What a picture of love. So God's saying, a new commandment I give you, that you love one another. You've got now a new example, a new model, how I love through the cross. That's how I want you to love each other in Royal Oak. But he doesn't stop there. Look what he says in verse 34. By this will all men know you are my disciples. If you want to do evangelism as a church, if you want to witness as a church, here's the answer from Jesus. By this shall all men know you are my disciples. When? You get out there giving Bible studies and give the neighbours food and take cans of nut meat down the street and fly a flag outside saying God loves you and have a bumper sticker saying God loves you. By this shall all men know you are my disciples, that you belong to me and I belong to you, and that I'm going to take care of you when? You love one another. When you love one another, it's radical love. It's radical. And this is, I believe, the love that John in Revelation 12:17 is actually speaking about. Here is a commandment-keeping church, not just the 10 commandments, but keeping the 10 commandments in the context of an abiding love that Jesus shared on the cross with each one of us. Let me illustrate this. I'll show you how this works. Come to 2 Samuel 11. Bad things happen when we don't take care of each other, when we're not loving. Here's a beautiful story. Well, it's not actually, it's shocking. 2 Samuel chapter 11 and verse 1. We know this story. David is tempted to have adultery with Bathsheba. Bathsheba's a married woman. Her husband's out fighting a war, and while he's out fighting a war, David is tempted, has sex with her, there's a baby on the way, and he orchestrates the murder of this innocent man. But it's worse than that, guys. We often look at the story of David's adultery and we're horrified at the immorality, how he's broken the law of thou shalt not commit adultery. But it's worse than that. We read here in chapter 1 that this was the springtime when kings were meant to be out fighting. What's David doing? Oh, looking after himself. He's being lawless. Leaders eat last. Where's David? He's not even there to eat last. He's back in the palatial palace. He says, I'm not a king. I'm not going out there with my troops and getting my hands dirty. I'm staying home. Also in verse 2 it says an evening, but if you read the Hebrew, it's really late afternoon. He's been having a siesta in a hot day, and he gets up late afternoon when he sees his neighbour having a bath. What's he doing, living the life of the leisurely rich while his soldiers are out fighting? What sort of a leader? No Marine would ever do that. No leader worth their true salt would do that. And so what happens as a result? Rebellion in the kingdom. His boy Absalom, the fairest boy, rebels against his dad. The kingdom supports Absalom. Why? Would you trust a leader who doesn't protect his people like that? Would you die for a leader like that? Absalom had an incredible seedbed of disloyalty to his father because of this one act of David's lawlessness, not just with adultery, but that he wasn't there taking care of his people. And I tell you how bad, it even gets worse. In 2 Samuel chapter 23 and verse 39, it mentions, 23 verse 39, it mentions David had 30 mighty warriors who had been with him in the cave when Saul was attacking him. And these warriors were incredible men. You ought to read the description of them. And you know, in verse 39, it mentions one of these incredible, brave soldiers. Who is it? Uriah. This man for years had been putting his life on the line to protect David. And how does David repay him? Makes him an impersonal thing that he can just discard. That's not leadership. That's disobedience, not taking care of people. It's one thing to commit a grievous sin like he'd done with adultery, but it's an entirely other thing not to take care of his people, particularly one who had been so faithful. And we ought to know how important he was because Uriah's house was so close to the royal palace. He'd been a great champion for David, and that's how, as a leader, David repaid him. And that's what's happening in our world. It's lawless. It's not honouring and valuing people, and it's chaotic. Can't trust a man who shows such disregard for the value of people. You know, our world's preoccupied with individual rights. But I think it's time we shifted it to collective responsibility. I was at a course and a guy was talking, and man, it resonated with me. He said, you know, we're so focused on diversity that it actually separates us. We're so focused on individual ethnicities getting their rights met and their needs met that it's actually polarising us and separating us. What we should be looking at is unity and diversity. The diversity is not the big deal. It's that we come together as such different people in a unity. That's the miracle. And that's the thing we ought to be focused on. As long as we're focused on your rights and your needs and my needs, we're pulling each other apart. Diversity should be acknowledged, but it's only valuable if we're all working together. That made a lot of sense to me, particularly for a church. Okay, how do we love one another? The new commandment. I'm giving you 3 ways. 3 ways how we love each other. Acts 2 is the best example of how we need to love each other. How do we as a church make sure that we're not putting bureaucracies, that we're not putting hierarchies, that we're not putting stuff in the way of valuing people, our people? 3 ways. Number 1, I think we need to bring people together. Amazing thing happened last week. Last Sabbath afternoon, we went for what we call an oak walk. If you've never been on an oak walk, you ought to go on one. I tell you, it's been one of the highlights for the last couple of years. I met Marie. Now, you're not going to believe this, but I'm actually quite shy. I grew up in a rural area and very, very shy. And I'm still shy. When I'm publicly speaking, I've got confidence, but as soon as I go away, I'm actually quite a shy person. And Marie's come to this church for years, and I've never really spoken to her. And she came on this oak walk, and we walked together, and I felt great empathy with her. She was a sister. And I don't kiss many people, but when I left, I gave her a kiss. Because I felt so close to her. I felt, hey, she's part of my family. I'd never felt that way before, but here, when we brought people together, I got a sense of oneness with her. Do you know Anthony and Heidi? They're an amazing couple. I didn't know them very well, but I had a little meeting with them the other day, and then we went on this oak walk. Anthony has a heart as big as the Waikato River to love people. He loves in social justice and caring for people. He'll know exactly. He could say it much better than me today, what I'm trying to say. He deeply cares for people. And I couldn't be in his presence without thinking, God, I wish I had more of that attribute in my life. It's words for me, but he knows actually how it works. And then there's Mark. Did you know Mark's a capitalist? He's a Christian capitalist. And he gave me all the arguments and all the rest of it. And, you know, it sounded really good, and I believed it until at the end he told me, confidentially, that he's a chief. Can you see the connection? He's already a privileged person. He's already come from a privileged home. He's already part of privilege. Of course he'd believe in opportunity. But I got to know him. I love Mark like a brother. He's the most wonderful man in the world. Who else did I meet there? Terence. Terence is pretty quiet, but boy, he asked some really good questions about women's ordination. And as I was listening to it, I thought, man, this guy's really deep into this. This is wonderful. I'm loving this. Isn't it amazing when God's people come together without even intentionally trying to build connections, that amazing connections are built? We've got to create more of those as a church. Secondly, we've got to keep our church manageable. Professor Dunbar, an anthropologist from the University of Oxford, discovered this. People cannot maintain more than 150 people in a close relationship. As soon as you get more than 150 people, you lose the closeness. You can't remember their name and you don't have enough time to get around them. I know that here with church lunches. Some of you probably think I'm a snob, but I've got 10 people that I'm very close to, and I only really see them at a church lunch, and by the time I've got around these 10 buddies, I got no more time. And the other day I was disgusted with it. And I said to Kay coming to church, I've got to do something about this. So we're sitting in a Sabbath school, and at the end of it I was sitting by a lady and I said, I don't know your name, but I'd like to know your name and I'd like to know 3 things about you. She looked at me. She looked like a rock had fallen on my head asking such questions. She said, are you fair go? I said, I am fair go. Three things about you. She said, my name's Carol, I'm from Indonesia, and I'm a medical doctor. I found out so much about her. She's now my sister. We are family. Whereas before I'd give her a polite sort of nod. Sometimes we're intimidated by how many people are in this church, and it is a major problem for leadership, because Dunbars said more than 150, you can't have meaningful relationships with people. Somehow we have to invent how we become personal within the confines of what sociologists tell us, that we need to be smaller units. Here's what Dunbars' research findings said. When groups get bigger, people are less likely to work hard and less likely to help each other. Think of the working bees next door. I'll tell you this. If our church had 140 members, it would be much easier to finish that hall next door than having 300, because of what Dunbar's saying here. But we don't want less people. Somehow we have to create structures where we know a group of people passionately, closely, meaningfully, vitally. And the last one I got here is find delight in each other. When I came to this church, an elder used to walk by me and never even acknowledge me. I'm not kidding you. Elders are human beings as well. Invariably, he'd walk right by me and never even acknowledge me. Not just say hello, wouldn't even smile at me, and he was an elder up the front. I thought, what sort of a church is this? Thank God for Mark Ryan. Thank God for the Mark Ryans of this world. That's not good enough. I'd chastise them today. Say, ha, 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 not good enough. People matter in this church. Don't you walk by anyone without giving them a smile. Don't you walk by anyone without doing something positive to encourage them. You don't know what's going on in their life. Greet them. You know, some of you at a parent thing, I told you about raised eyebrows. Do you realise neurologically that when you raise your eyebrows, the person who sees it instantly feels that you're a safe person? Instantly. So often, you know, we're greeting people like, oh, hello, how are you today? Had a good week? Going to go, oh, dangerous. But when you go, oh, hello, how are you today? Had a good week? And you just raise your eyebrows, neurologically, the other person's brain says, this is a person who values me. This is a person I can be safe with. We need to find delight in each other. We are the family of God. We're going to spend all eternity together. Let's enjoy one another's company right down here. Amen? I was in a church and it had less than 150 people, so we knew everyone really like a family. See, you can be a family church when it's 150, but more than that, it tends to get more complex. We've got to think of better ways how we keep it small within the units of the big. Anyway, Lucy, she was a new member. She had 2 kids. They were diabolical darlings. When anyone would preach, they were running, playing chasey up and down. They were running in the front. They were yelling at each other. It was chaos. Absolute chaos. And in elders' meetings, the elders were tearing their hair. What are we going to do with these kids? Some even suggested that we tell the woman not to come. Said, you can't do that. That's church. That's church. We can't ask her not to come. Prayer meeting. She would come and people would say, I wish Lucy didn't come to prayer meeting. I can't focus. I can't concentrate. Her kids are just running riot back and forth. This went on for about a year. I went and visited Lucy. She trusted me. And as I was sitting at her table, she started crying. Then she started sobbing. And sobbing here. You know, sometimes we cry here. Sobbing, sobbing, sobbing. And then she told me that every day she was being beaten up. Every day these kids were being yelled at. Every day the kids were being thrown over the floor. Every day it was a living nightmare for Lucy in this house by this brute she is married to. And I went back to church and I told the elders the story and the tears flowed. Whoa! This little lady with these 2 kids is living in prison, a concentration camp, Guantanamo Bay, and we're complaining? These little kids, this is freedom. They feel safe here to let all that energy out. We've got to love these kids. And you know what? I saw elders picking them up and hugging them. I saw elders sitting them on their knee. I saw elders getting down and interacting with these little children. And you know the miracle? They stopped yelling. They stopped yelling. They would come and in legitimate ways get loved. Family, we've got to be a church like that, amen? We've got to be a church that listens to the homeless, the alcoholic, the addict, the broken, those that are just in crisis. We've got to be a church for the rich. We've got to be church for the single mum. We've got to be the church for those that are going through sickness and disease, those bound by sin. We've got to be a church that listens to all these because God gave us a new commandment that you love one another.